Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video, and today we will be discussing Dr.Ratio's team compositions ranging from the Duo DPS as well as Hypercarry setup. So far, Dr.Ratio has exceeded all expectations as a free unit, dealing tremendous amounts of damage at an extremely fast pace to the point where he really doesn't even need to deal with the mobs just because of how fast and how much damage he's dealing to our current elite and boss targets. So we will be discussing his most optimal team comps and see which teams enables Dr.Ratio to deal the highest amount of damage in the fastest amount of time possible. As usual, for our sustains, Huo is going to be our de facto best in slot in terms of damage output, so that is going to be a constant, right? And as always, viable is not the same as optimal, and without further ado, let's get into today's content. So first things first, as usual, we'll be talking about his team building basics, and there are essentially three different points to consider. The first of all being the ultimate rotation. Now, despite having a 140 energy cost, it is very common for Dr.Ratio to maintain a 3-turn or even a 2-turn ultimate with Tingyun due to the hit RNG as well as getting kills, which refunds 10 energy as well. And all this is of course without running an energy regeneration rope. So having a high ultimate uptime on Dr.Ratio is going to be absolutely crucial for his high damage output, since more than 70% of his total damage is coming from his follow-up attack, not from his skill, not from his ultimate. It is from the follow-up attack, right? And so the more follow-up attacks we do, which comes from our ultimate giving us 2 free follow-up attacks, the more beneficial it's going to be for us. So with that being established, players should be building their teams around maintaining at least a 3-turn ultimate, or else they would be facing a rather steep damage drop-off. And as you can see from the chart over here, basically 3 different scenarios. First is the 4-turn ultimate, which pretty much is not going to be the case, because as long as you can get hit or get killed, you should be either at a 3-turn ultimate or the 2-turn ultimate. The 3-turn ultimate is going to be if you are not going to be running Tingyun, you're not going to be running Huo, you are running her with either Ruan, Silverwolf or Topaz, then you're pretty much going to be stuck to the 3-turn ultimate. Then if you are going to be running Tingyun and Huo, then players can enjoy a 2-turn ultimate. Then moving on to the next point, which is the debuff appliers. Now, Dr.Ratio, he absolutely needs at least one debuffer to maintain not only the 100% follow-up proc rate, it also allows him to gain up to 50% additional damage from his tracers, right? So as such, a double harmony comp would not really be as optimal compared to a 1 harmony and 1 nihility comp currently, until in the future a harmony unit can apply debuffs constantly, or if you're going to be getting another sustain that can apply debuff constantly, then maybe we can consider the double harmony team comp, right? But until that day happens, then 1 debuffer, 1 harmony, 1 sustain should be the generic things that players are looking at. At this point, I do want to mention, if players are going to be trying for a 0 cycle Dr.Ratio, or even at least even a 1 cycle, you could actually not run a sustain on Dr.Ratio, because his damage is just so high to the point where he can very easily take out an elite enemy, and I'll be explaining this a little bit further later. But essentially, because the damage is so high, imaginary break further pushes the enemy action value behind. Players might not face that much of a sustain issue because of Dr.Ratio's damage output, right? So do go ahead and try running your triple support comp, which has been a staple for almost every single 0 cycles as of the current honkaistarrail meta, right? And then lastly, it's going to be targeting priority. Now, Dr.Ratio's ultimate follow-up attack trigger, it will be completely wasted if the target dies too early, even against a 40 imaginary res enemies, such as you can see here, the Automatron Gatekeeper. Run May's res penetration still provides an ample amount of damage, and this chart over here, you can see that with this team comp running Dr.Ratio, Run May, Huo, and Topaz, you can still output around 360,000 damage using his full combo, which will pretty much one-shot every single elite we have in the current game, right? So because of this, players need to allocate their damage accordingly instead of just all in on a single target. This is a very common mistake that players might face, which is you are using your Dr.Ratio skill and his ultimate and all of his follow-up attacks on the single target, which means most of the time, I'm not sure if you guys have noticed, but if your Dr.Ratio is well built, chances are at least 1 stack of your ultimate will be wasted because the enemy dies too fast. So in order to prevent this from happening, players should be, ideally, for example, in a 2 elite scenario, using Dr.Ratio's ultimate on 1 target and then using his skills on the other target, right? So once you mark one target with the ultimate, make use of your supports, make use of your other teammates to attack the other target, and Dr.Ratio will constantly throw out his follow-up attacks, and those two follow-up attacks with the ultimate should be able to one-shot the enemy elite if well built enough, right? In the meantime, he can just go ahead and focus on the other elite. So that is that for his team building basic. Now, looking into Dr.Ratio's general DPS rankings, there's basically two slightly different findings from the two different CN content creators that I found due to likely different parameters they have set for their theory crafts, right? But one thing that we know for a fact that's very, very consistent is that Topaz and Ruan / Silverwolf seems to be the best in slot comp for pretty much all Dr.Ratio team comps, right? When it comes to theoretical damage. But like I said, it is theoretical damage. They don't really release how they get their simulations from, so do take it with a pinch of salt, and you guys should be trying to test it out themselves. Jumping straight into the actual team comp itself, let's just talk about a team that pretty much everyone is in common agreement with, which is Topaz plus Ruan / Silverwolf. So the reason why Topaz works so well with Dr.Ratio is because they are extremely synergistic with one another. Not to mention, they also have the highest damage ceiling with Eidolon investments, namely Topaz Eidolon 1, Topaz Signature Light Cone, Ruan / Eidolon 1, Ruan / Signature Light Cone, and all this kind of stuff. So they tend to just have the highest ceiling in general, right? And then when it comes to the actual kit itself, for Topaz, Numbi can boost Ratio's follow-up attack if Numbi hits a target marked by Dr.Ratio's ultimate. And then when Dr.Ratio releases his follow-up attack, assuming that Topaz is marking the proof of that on the same target, then it will advance Numbi's action value. And then when Numbi's action value is advanced, Numbi will be able to get her hit out even faster, which then triggers even more of Dr.Ratio's ultimate follow-up attack, right? So this very, very synergistic cycle allows a very smooth gameplay, even if Topaz is being an off element. Even if the enemy is not weak to fire, players can still find exceptional results, especially if we were to run them with Ruan / Silverwolf. For Silverwolf, she can go ahead and mark the weakness implant on the enemy, and then for Ruan, especially at E0S1, if you guys do not have the defense reduction, the rest penetration is still extremely useful for both Topaz and Dr.Ratio. So that is that. And then, like I mentioned, Huo is basically there's a generic sustain that is very, very beneficial for almost every single team comp. It ensures that Dr.Ratio maintains a 3-turn ultimate. Then at this point, I do want to say that with an E1S1 Topaz, it will guarantee the maximum amount of debuffs on the target, even without adding nihility units, right? And not to mention, Ruan Tenantobulum Rebloom is also another debuff, right? So with E1S1 Topaz, it will guarantee Dr.Ratio's full 50% damage as well as 100% follow-up trigger rate. Without Topaz Eidolons or Signature Light Cones, players might be considering swapping out Ruan to Silverwolf just to get the 100% follow-up trigger rate, right? Because this is very, very important. But generally speaking, it tends to be better to stick with Ruan rather than adding Silverwolf unless we are against off element situations. Assuming that we are on element, that is to say our main DPS is Dr.Ratio and the enemies are really weak to imaginary, then Ruan weakness rate efficiency, damage percentage, as well as her rest penetration tends to provide a better result than Silverwolf, especially since she's just a lot more comfortable to play, right? Silverwolf, she can't cast her ultimate on the very first turn. She still needs to take time to mark the defense down on the different targets, especially in our current endgame content, right? So generally, Ruan is just a little bit more comfortable to play, but at the end of the day, the difference is very, very minor. When moving on further, and exactly why Topaz and Dr.Ratio is just super synergistic, you can see from this chart over here. So once Dr.Ratio marks the ultimate on the target, Numbi goes ahead and does a hit, and then when Numbi gets a hit, then Dr.Ratio will trigger up his follow-up attack talent, right? Then after that, Dr.Ratio will use his skill, and then when Numbi goes again, assuming that we are on the same target, since one skill into one follow-up attack will be 2 different hits, which will advance Numbi forward all the way to 100%, assuming that we are under Topaz ultimate, right? Then Numbi will go again, and then Dr.Ratio's second ultimate trigger will then go for a second time, right? So this combo, this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hit combo can essentially one-shot pretty much every single major boss we have in Honkai starrail. With the calculations done by this CN theorycrafter, which is assuming that everybody is E0S1 with 28 effective substats of a Dr.Ratio, namely crit damage and attack, it will deal around 630,000 damage with Silverwolf and 600,000 damage with Ruan. Do expect variations depending on your build, depending on the environment, so it's not really set to stone. And the reason why this pretty much one-shots everything is because one of our highest health pool enemies right now in a single phase is MOC 12 Kafka, which is around 650,000 HP. So this full combo can straight up just wipe Kafka off the face of the existence before she can even move, right? So it's really powerful. And then one more point before we move on is that Topaz also helps Dr.Ratio with clearing mobs, while Dr.Ratio focuses on the main target. So that's also another factor to consider, especially in scenarios where Dr.Ratio cannot deal with a very high amount of mobs, right? Even though we say that Dr.Ratio can deal so much damage that he can ignore mobs, but in the event that we actually need to get rid of the mobs, Topaz will be an excellent addition for Dr.Ratio. And then moving on to another team comp, which is basically Tingyun plus either Pela / Ruan. Now this is an extremely potent Hypercarry setup due to the 2-turn ultimate with Tingyun. Now in practice, based on my own testings, this team comp with Tingyun / Pela and Ruan, it has an easier time to complete fast MOC clears due to the issue of damage overflow with the Topaz / Dr.Ratio combination, right? Like I mentioned previously, the combo that we've seen just now, the 7-hit combo with Topaz ultimate, Dr.Ratio ultimate and all the follow-up attacks, yes, it does one-shot the elite at dealing almost 600,000 damage, but this damage will be completely wasted on the elite because most of our elites' health pool is around 350,000 HP, right? So there will definitely be damage overflow if we are going to be trying out this combination, right? But for this Topaz and Pela comp, we can very freely, or at least more freely, allocate Dr.Ratio's ultimate to the right target, and then we use the skill on the secondary target, right? So because of this, there tends to be just a generally easier comfort for players when it comes to practical scenarios. But one potential issue that players might face is that Tingyun, she needs to be well invested in speed in order to maintain a 2-turn ultimate with Dr.Ratio, because as we know by now, Tingyun, she herself cannot maintain a 2-turn ultimate, right? It is basically almost impossible to get a 2-turn ultimate with Tingyun. So one way to alleviate this situation and how players can essentially guarantee a 2-turn ultimate on Dr.Ratio is for Tingyun to become faster than Dr.Ratio by at least 1 turn, right? If Tingyun can move 3 times and Dr.Ratio moves 2 times, then essentially you can guarantee Tingyun a 3-turn ultimate while Dr.Ratio will have a 2-turn ultimate. So the speed benchmark to attain this is roughly 174 speed with an S5 Dance to go thrice on the very first turn in order to maintain a 2-turn ultimate. Of course, if we are going to be using on 1 whack, then this will reduce our speed threshold, but generally do keep in mind your Tingyun cannot be too slow in order for this to have a 100% uptime. And lastly, is going to be some less optimal supports compared to the previous 2 comps that we have been discussing. And the first one is actually Bronya. Now, Bronya, she herself is still really good. You can definitely still use her with Dr.Ratio, but there's a lot of limiting conditions that makes her less of a viable pick. Number one, the most important reason is essentially there are 2 teams in Memory of Chaos, and generally Bronya tends to shine better with another team such as your Blade team, your Jingliu team, your Scylla team. So all these teams, they can make use of Bronya more effectively compared to how Dr.Ratio can make use of Bronya. And the main reason is because majority of Dr.Ratio's follow-up attack will not benefit from Bronya's damage percentage buff, as it is out of Dr.Ratio's turn unless players have an E6 Bronya, right? And another reason is also because the rotations with Bronya would require a hyper speed Bronya, which is basically to say around 160 to 170 speed using the auto attack into skill combination. Because if we were to use a slow Bronya matching the 135 to 134 Dr.Ratio Bronya, we're definitely going to run into skill point issues even if players have an E1 S1 Bronya, right? So because of this, it is not only difficult to build this hyperspeed Bronya, it is also not as optimal compared to making use of Bronya in another team comp such as Jingliu and Blade, right? So that's why Bronya is not as optimal compared to the supports listed here. And another pick that players may be considering is actually Welt. Now in theory, a duo DPS running Welt and Ruan works, right? Because Welt has a vulnerability debuff from his ultimate. He also imprisons the enemy, which enables a 4-piece banditry set for Dr.Ratio, and generally he also does toughness bar damage with his bounce, on and all the kind of good stuff, right? But in practice, Welt's real value will only come from his ultimate if Welt is not the main DPS, right? And if we want to get Welt's ultimate up as soon as possible, then he will need to have skill points, which leads to both Dr.Ratio and Welt competing with one another for skill points, and it basically leads to a situation where we just don't have enough skill points to go around, no matter how fast our remaining 2 support and sustains are, right? So without a skill point, Welt has a very, very slow ultimate when using his basic attack, even with his Eidolon 2, right? Because his Eidolon 2, the energy generator, it only triggers once if you use his basic attack. So because of these reasons, alternative supports like the ones I've listed previously, like Tingyun, Pela, Ruan, Silverwolf, they tend to perform a lot better than Welt. And then lastly is going to be our remaining 4-star harmony supports, which is R-star, Yuko, and Hanya. They are honestly decent alternatives if the player lacks Ruan and Tingyun, but they're just generally not as optimal as compared to the previous supports that I've mentioned, right? So for R-star, there is no real need for R-star speed and attack buff compared to Tingyun's energy regeneration, as well as a ton of buffs that Ruan can provide to our team, right? E6 Yukong is actually possible. In fact, it is really good in the niche usage, especially in 0 cycles for an ultra fast burst damage, right? Because if we were to cast Yukong's ultimate during the entire time, as long as during our ally's turn, Yukong's buff is still intact, Dr.Ratio can still benefit from Yukong's attack buff, crit rate buff, and crit damage buff, right? So honestly, it's doable, but definitely needs a lot more fine tuning, and I wouldn't recommend this for the general player base. And then lastly, Hanya essentially has the same reasons as R-star, right? She has speed buff, attack buff, damage buff, but just generally not as useful as compared to Tingyun and Ruan. And so in summary, Dr.Ratio has pretty much exceeded all expectations of a free DPS, having an extremely smooth kit that can dish out damage very quickly, either as a duo DPS or as a Hypercarry. For a duo DPS team comp, you can be running Dr.Ratio with Ruan or Silverwolf with Topaz, and if you're going to be using him as a Hypercarry, then I recommend players to run Ruan or Pela with Tingyun. At the end of the day, experiment with yourself, because theory can only go so far. And with that, we've come to the end of today's content. I will be looking forward to the version 2.0 live stream later. If you have any discussions, feel free to hop on my Discord at Pokke's Village, where we're a very active community talking about honkaistarrail on a daily basis. If you guys would like to check out my stream, that's going to be twitch.tv/MrPokke, where I'll be streaming pretty much almost every single day. Schedule will be uploaded on Discord. I'll see you guys in the 2.0 trailer reveal, because I will be uploading this video hopefully as of the time of this recording. And that's all I have for today. All the best for Gaja Poos, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care. I genuinely cannot believe this shit. I genuinely cannot believe this shit. I genuinely cannot believe this shit, guys. Did I say how I genuinely cannot believe this shit? I genuinely cannot believe this shit, guys.